Hi, I'd like to call this the first meeting of the Water Transition and Evaluation Committee to order. It is Wednesday, September 25th, 2019, and thank you all for coming to our inaugural meeting tonight. It's great to have you all. So let me walk through what our agenda is going to look like tonight, and I'll set some guidelines as to how things are going to go moving forward. So tonight we're going to kind of meet each other and introduce ourselves to one another up here, because I have a feeling we'll be spending a lot of time together over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years. So I hope we end up liking each other before the night's over, or the 4 years are over. We're going to talk about what our charge are, what is our responsibility, what really is our role in the whole water transition process. Then we're going to hear from some folks about the transition to date. So what has occurred to date? We're going to be brought up to speed on that. We're also going to talk about where things stand today. An RFP was issued this week for the third-party operator. We'll hear about that and some of the dates associated with that. Then we're going to talk about some of our tasks, right, to learn about some of the ways that we can help and provide input to the transition process. Ultimately, we'll talk about kind of, we may or may not do this tonight, actually, who's assigned to various tasks, but we may need to table that tonight, but at some point, each of us will have additional responsibility outside of the committee, and we'll be ending up reporting back to the committee. We'll get some housekeeping items that I'll walk through. If there's any comments from the public, certainly they're welcome. And we'll talk about next steps and meeting dates. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Great. So why don't we go ahead and just introduce ourselves to each other? Why don't we, say your name and kind of your involvement, either professionally with the town. And Dick, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. My name's Dick Norman. Live in Crow Point. Been a resident of Hingham for about 40 plus years or so. The last 20 in Crow Point. My way of background, I've worked in the energy industry since 1970. Principal activity I presently have, I'm sort of semi-retired, but I founded a renewable energy company back in 1980 or so. We presently operate operate, maintain several small hydroelectric projects in New England. We also manage 2 projects under a contract very similar to the contract the town is contemplating with an operating company with the city of Nashua, New Hampshire. They own 2 hydroelectric plants that we manage. By way of background, I'm a generalist. I have an MBA. I've got a BS. Used to be in nuclear power school, nuclear submarines, but have had sort of a hands-on experience running both our hydroelectric projects from a regulatory perspective, financial perspective, operating and maintenance perspective, personnel perspective. Also, during that period of time, as sort of a side venture, I was the vice president and treasurer for underground natural gas storage facility that comprised underground natural gas wells. It's in upstate New York, compressor station, lines and such. So I have both a financial and a technical background.
Great. Thanks.
Great. I'm Scott Sear. I live in Liberty Pole. Been a Hingham resident for about 12 or 13 years now. My background is in mostly mechanical energy systems, HVAC, and then industrial valves. That's kind of the forte of what I do. Not quite as extensive as Dick over here, but very interested in helping this committee in any capacity that I can.
Great.
My name is David Von Lassika. I live on Martin's Lane in World's End, not with the animals. I'm an engineer by background. I also have a business degree. I just retired in April from a company called Hollingsworth & Vose, where I managed various commercial business units along the way. My experience includes acquisitions and the integration of acquisitions as we did them to grow the company. So I probably come to this committee with some acquisition and operations experience.
Joe?
Hi, my name's Joe Welch. I live on Palmer's Lane in South Hingham. I was born and raised in town, raised my family here. My business background is mostly business operations and project management. I worked for John Hancock for many, many years, most recently Iron Mountain. Graduate of Northeastern University, business degree, and I'm looking forward to participating in the committee.
Great. I'm Jim Taylor. I've been in Hingham a little over 20 years now. I'm in the wealth management business, and then for the town, I've been involved with a number of things. Most recently, I served 6 years on the advisory committee, and during those 6 years, I served as a liaison to the water acquisition study process. So, while I don't have the technical background you gentlemen do, I was immersed in the town's efforts pretty significantly over the last 6 or 7 years. So I'm excited to be on this side of it now, and now we're moving forward with the transition. So just for the purpose of the folks that may be watching, let me just walk through our committee's charge. This is a reminder. So what our charge is, if you recall, we were established due to the passage of Article 11 at this past year's town meeting. And it established the Water Transition and Evaluation Committee. And we're comprised of 5 members, obviously, the 2 of whom were appointed by the selectmen and 3 by the moderator. I was appointed as chair jointly by the selectmen and the moderator. So the purpose, according to town meeting, is for us to advise on all water system transition matters, as well as to conduct a study of the governance and operation of the water system. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but that's going to happen down the road. And additionally, the Board of Selectmen charged our committee as follows. So during the ownership and regulatory transition phase, which we're in currently, and until the closing of the corporate acquisition by the town, which includes all the appropriate approvals by the DEP and all the regulatory agencies, we'll have a number of tasks. And let me kind of read some of the charges that the selectmen have provided to us. So we're going to help them. We're effectively a body that is helping with the transition and helping the board and the board in terms of the transition itself. So we're going to help with the transition of the water rights, as I mentioned. We're going to help and provide input on the development of a business plan, which demonstrates the capacity under safe water drinking standards as required by the DEP. We're going to assist the town in evaluating potential water system contract operators, so we'll have some input on that. We're going to assist the town in researching and developing water policies and regulations, which will be very fun. And we're going to talk, I think, something very importantly, which is how do we communicate properly to all the stakeholders, which may be ratepayers, residents of Hull, Hingham, and Cohasset, maybe other third parties that are interested in providing input to us, and maybe other committees, and I can think of the Water Supply Committee and the Ware River Watershed as 2 committees that would probably look to have some input into what is happening and making sure that they're heard. So we're really going to be a body that listens and helps. That's the way I think of us, and helps support the efforts going on. Now, once the transition occurs and is completed, and there's a new, and we have ownership of the water system and the third-party operators up and running, we're going to then switch hats a little bit. Probably the first thing we'll do after that, after a year of ownership, is help with a cost of service study. And that is done to really understand what is the cost of running the system, how much does it cost for us to provide water to the ratepayers, and provide information back to the water commissioners, who ultimately will set rates based on a lot of that information that they have. We'll probably also provide some input and assistance over the capital plan. Capital plan is a critical component of running a water system. Is, how do you maintain what you have, how do you fix what you have, and how do you make sure things don't break down going forward? And also, how can you improve the system? You hear complaints about brown water. Is there ways to get around it? We also need to be really mindful of the limitations set by the DEP in terms of water withdrawal, and how do we conserve water as a town. Once we're done with that, we'll provide some guidance. We'll then put a third hat on, and that is we'll serve as an evaluation committee which will be interesting. Now, what we're going to do is, we as a committee are going to look at the governance of the system. Is the current governance working? And then secondly, how's the operation of the system working? So we're going to be kind of a third-party evaluator, reporting back to the selectmen and the moderator on those things. Now, clearly, we can't do that until the system's been up and running for a while. So we'll talk about, I don't know exactly how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to create some metrics in helping us measure the success and the efficiency of the water system. We'll monitor those metrics, collect citizen and ratepayer feedback, and then ultimately make a recommendation as to, is it working, is it not working, do things need to be changed, do they not need to be changed? So that's my comment early on, that we're going to be together for a while. This is a kind of an odd committee that we have multiple responsibilities that in some cases can go on for quite a while. So once again, it's going to be fun to work with all you folks moving forward. Anyone have any questions on that? Great. So we're joined today by a few folks, and we're going to hear from most of them. So I think what's interesting is that Mary Power, who's the Hingham Selectman, who's the liaison for the water efforts and the transition on the board, is going to update us on efforts to date. So she's here, we'll hear from her. Now, the town, and Mary can speak to this, has hired additional professional help in the transition. We're going to meet a couple of those members tonight. One is a firm called Environmental Partners Group. Mark White, a principal, will be joining us, and we'll hear more from him as to what their role is and how we can help assist in the process. And then Tom Mayo, the town administrator, is here. We'll hear from him about the RFP and where it stands and some of the timing around it. And then he'll introduce us to Jeff Nutting, who is a former town manager from Franklin, who's helping Tom with a lot of the municipal issues associated with acquiring a water company. You just can't sign a document and own it. There's a lot of things that are going to need to be done through the course of this transition to make sure every T is crossed and I is dotted. So we'll say hello to Jeff today as well. So with that, I would love for Mary, if you don't mind, coming up here and being on that table. I got to say, these seats are way more comfortable than any other seat.
Kind of liking this table better than that table.
Yeah, I like the seat, though, a lot better. It's very good.
I've got some documents, and I've got some extra copies for people in the room. Sure.
So for the purposes of the folks at home, we will have a Town of Hingham website. Within the Town of Hingham website is web pages for all the committees. We're in the process of establishing one for our committee, which should be up within a week. Everything talked about tonight, any document shared tonight, any document shared in the future, you'll be able to find up there. Obviously, we're being taped. We'll have links to all these, so for folks that couldn't make it, they'll be able to go online and watch us, which should be very thrilling for them, I'm sure, on a Friday or Saturday night with popcorn, and kind of catch up on what's going on. So we want to be as transparent and open as possible. So with that, Mary, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Mary Power, 1 King Philip Path. As Jim mentioned, I'm the Board of Selectmen Liaison to the water acquisition and joined by the Town Administrator, Tom Mayo. What I want to do is give you a really high-level view of what's really happened since the day after the town meeting vote. But I want to try to move through that quickly because I know that you have a lot of work to do with, in particular, Mark White. So happy to take questions, but I'm also going to try to just kind of hit some of the headlines. I would just start out by letting you know that the night of town meeting, actually, we were approached by representatives from Aquarion who asked if we would be willing to meet the next morning. And Tom and I did that on Tuesday morning. And that was really the beginning of what we would characterize as a very cooperative and very constructive relationship. And the town is very grateful to both Aquarion and Eversource for a shared commitment to have this transition go through as quickly and smoothly as possible. And we've had a lot of conversations and a lot of contact, and I think while this is a very complex transaction, and Eversource and Aquarion would be the first to say, hey, we haven't done something like this ever before, I think we're all working together cooperatively. We understand there are certain things that we have to, take our time with, but it's really been a pretty smooth process. In terms of some of the things that have happened since town meeting, right now we're in a period of good husbandry, and that essentially means that Aquarion is responsible for the operation of the water system, but that any major capital projects the town needs to sign off on, and that's because the town would have financial responsibility for any of those things. So one of the things that we started in early May and have carried on ever since is that every Monday morning there is a joint call with representatives from Aquarion, typically John Welch and Steve Olson, myself, Tom Mayo, Assistant Town Administrator Michelle Monsegur, and Ryan Trahan from Environmental Partners, to just talk about capital projects. If you saw one of our meetings in the summer, there was an underdrain on one of the, in the plant that had to be replaced. That was a capital expenditure because it was over $50,000. It was taken up in a Board of Selectmen meeting. But basically, every week, we talk about capital, and that's everything from the water main replacement project on Beach Ave that cost $1.3 million to the service line connection at a home on Main Street that cost $2,500. And so we talk about all those, and we've also, during the course of this, have worked out sort of a reporting, a method for the town to get updated with monthly financial information. We take a look at that, we analyze it, we ask questions, and I will also just tell you that in terms of good husbandry, when we finish the calendar year, the water system will have had approximately $4 million in capital improvements in calendar year 2019, and that includes over 6,000 feet of water main replacements. I would just note that that is double the 5-year average and triple the 10-year average. So one of the things that we have talked about with the town is accelerating capital investment, and by the way, the largest water main project is 3,000 feet of water main in Beach Ave and Hull, and that's something that's been very important to the ratepayers in Hull. Another aspect of kind of this good husbandry, or actually, I'll jump ahead. Another thing that we had to do is there was an outstanding rate case, 1929, which was the water main replacement surcharge. You may have remembered that was called MRAM. And that was a pending rate case at the time of town meeting, and so a determination had to be made. How do we deal with that in light of this acquisition and in light of the fact that there would be transition? And litigation counsel Carrie Ryan, in conjunction with Tom and the selectmen and the Attorney General's office, a settlement was negotiated and concluded. That was concluded in August. And the good news about concluding that and settling that out of the rate case process was it allows us to focus on transition, it allows Aquarion and Eversource to focus on transition. Obviously, we've staffed up the Transition and Evaluation Committee and developed a charge. I'm also pleased to report that the town and Aquarion have had 3 meetings with the DEP, and that's been with Commissioner Suberg. And we are in close coordination and have the full support of the DEP in going through this transition. Every 60 to 90 days, representatives from Aquarion, Eversource, and the town report to Commissioner Suberg on our process. And the feeling of the DEP is, so far, is that we're approaching this in the right way, that we're going about it in the right way. We're marching ahead in good stead. In terms of the transaction itself, this is a complex transaction, and so we are, again, working towards creating what's called an asset purchase agreement, which will be kind of similar to a purchase and sale agreement. That's really, that's Tom and the town's attorneys. I would also tell you, again, as I think is indicative of the commitment we have from Eversource and Aquarion, our main point of contact is a very high-placed senior executive in Eversource, and every Monday, when we finish the 9:30 call, we go into the 10 o'clock call, and that is a call with a senior executive from Eversource, the chief general counsel of Eversource, and senior executives from Aquarion to talk about the transaction aspect of that. The transaction piece is going to be outside of the committee's purview, but what I can tell you is that a lot of these things are intertwined. So as we move ahead on the asset purchase agreement, we're in close coordination with environmental partners. Jeff is helping to move that along. Also, with respect to financing, the town is in touch with capital markets, who are our financial advisors. We are aware of the timing. We've talked to them about the timing of the transaction. The financing actually is something that the town does on a pretty regular basis. We're essentially going to go through very much the same process that we do whenever we go out to market. The numbers are going to be a little bigger. But one of the things that we have decided to do is we are going to go through with, I'm saying it right, a negotiated?
Yes.
Negotiated sale as opposed to a competitive sale, which means an underwriter. And this is at the recommendation of capital markets, our financial advisors. It is their estimation that that will put the town in the strongest position going forward when it accesses the capital markets, which will help us with an attractive bid package and lower rates. As Jim alluded to, we realized very quickly that, in particular, Tom Mayo has a town to run, and this is a pretty complex transaction, and we are very fortunate that over the summer, we've partnered with a couple individuals who are going to help us and who bring some expertise to this that will be very helpful. You're going to meet Mark White from Environmental Partners Group shortly. EPG is really leading the way for us with the rates, the regulations, and the DEP business plan. What's exciting to us as well about EPG is that through a lot of the work that they've done, they have deep relationships with the DEP, and through a lot of the other work they've done, they have a really good line of sight into customer communication and notifications. So they will be working very closely with the Transition and Evaluation Committee. Jeff Nutting is sitting in the back of the room, and Jeff comes to us most recently from Franklin. He is a 40-year municipal veteran. There isn't a whole lot Jeff hasn't seen.
No, there's not.
And what we understand in a lot of this is that there are a lot of municipal decisions. There are policy decisions. There may be some bylaws that have to go to town meeting. And so Jeff's role in this is helping bring municipal expertise and bandwidth, because we're going to need that as we go forward. And that's been very helpful. The request for proposal, the RFP, this is what hit the street on Monday. This is actually the request for proposal. And it is available on the town website, and anybody can register and see a copy of the document and the attachments. I'll talk about that in a moment. The other activity since town meeting is that the water superintendent position has been refined and finalized. Again, Jeff is going to be helping us out with that search process, and we're actually going to start that pretty quickly because we recognize that it could take up to 6 months to fill that position. There are certain skills that are required, and we want to make sure that we have adequate time to bring the right resources on. Just the highlights on the RFP, because I won't read all this to you. But just to give you a background on our process, we reviewed water system RFPs from other communities. You may remember from the lead up to town meeting that the Hyannis water system RFP was considered the gold standard. I'm proud to say that the DEP and Environmental Partners says that this is now the gold standard. We got a lot of input. We reached out to a former retired water superintendent for feedback on our RFP. The DEP reviewed the RFP and gave us feedback. We sent it to the town of Hull, and town manager Lemnios reviewed it. John Welch and Steve Olson from Aquarion reviewed the scope of services and the portion of the RFP that dealt with the operations. Environmental Partners and Jeff reviewed the RFP. And then we also had counsel for the town review it. I would just say in general that this RFP, you know, as with any RFP the town issues, Chapter 30B governs procurement. So we have a defined process. Tom's going to walk you through the timing in a moment, but this document is available for people if you'd like to see it. You know, in terms of just some highlights, we've got staffing requirements in here, a scope of services. We're asking potential bidders to give us a transition plan. Again, in accordance with Chapter 30B, we have minimum and comparative criteria for the evaluation of different submissions. In terms of pricing, we talked a lot about, you know, how to put this together. Do we do 3 years? Do we do 5 years? Do we do a renewable term? And after a lot of consultation and thought, where we landed was an initial 5-year term with one additional 5-year term that's optional. And we also, with respect to billing services, we are looking at different ways to do billing. And so we've asked potential respondents to give us a quote with and without billing included, so that we have the ability to go out and see if perhaps there are some billing options, such as doing it ourselves or contracting with someone that could be more cost-effective. So I think that's kind of the highlights of the RFP. Before Tom kind of walks through the timing, I don't know, Jim, if anybody has any questions about anything else.
Any questions on this?
I do not.
I just wondered if you had considered the call center as well as an optional one.
The call
And
center?
the call, yeah, 24-hour, 724 call center.
For the billing and public.
For the billing.
So that could be a part of what the proposals will.
Yeah, I mean, as with billing, because you've already got some information. I think the water company, or excuse me, the electrical company, I think is already providing that service, and my recollection was, I think it's $100,000 a year or something that Eversource was charging, so.
Yep. Thank you.
And the optionality on the proposal for the additional 5-year term, that's at the towns, so the town has the ability to exercise an option?
Yes.
Solely the town, okay.
And what we've done is, you'll see in the pricing proposal worksheets, we get very detailed in years 1 through 5, and then in years 6 through 10, we ask for a bottom line number, knowing that, you know, it's really hard to project labor costs and chemical costs and things like that, you know, going out beyond 5 years.
Yes, David?
Mary, one further question on timing. Would the operator be on board effective with the town on day one owning the facilities?
Yeah, so, and actually, David, Tom's going to walk through, but what we envision here is that a water treatment operator would be selected, and we would actually see that there would probably be a period of, you know, kind of dual operation, where ideally whoever is running the system is there while, you know, for a couple weeks before Aquarion, you know, wraps up. I'd also just want to mention, because I know it's something that has been, that was talked about a lot in the lead-up to town meeting, there are 15 people that currently work in the water treatment plant, and one of the comparative criteria that we have in this RFP is a commitment to interview the existing employees. And so if you agree to interview 25% of the employees, that gives you a little bit of an advantage. If you agree to interview 50%, it's a little bit more of an advantage. So after consultation with, we've actually spoken with Aquarion and Eversource on this. We've spoken to the union. Where we landed was interviewing. And so again, if an operator comes in and, let's say hypothetically that the majority of the folks that are working there are going to continue, that transition period of Aquarion management to town management is shorter.
Great. Joe, you good?
I'm good, thanks.
David, anything else? Great. Tom, you want to walk through the timing? Thank you.
Reach all the way over, but I can try. Okay, so we'll start at the top. The RFP has been advertised and issued. It was available to the public this past Monday. If someone does want to go on and download it, we're asking that you fill out a registration form so that we know who the quote-unquote plan holders, is what procurement refers to them as, who the plan holders are, because there will likely be addenda throughout the process as questions come in and we add to it or clarify some points. We want to make sure all the plan holders get copies of those addenda. So that's the way we do that, is by tracking who's actually got a copy of it. So while we could have come in and handed them out, I'd like to, it's easier for tracking purposes to know who has it through the system. And then Aquarion has graciously agreed to host all potential vendors on October 15th, Tuesday, October 15th, for a site visit for the potential vendors to come through, walk through the facility, see what they would be taking on. The final date for the receipt of written questions as a result of having received the RFP, that'll be on Tuesday, November 5th. We're committing to, the purchasing agent will publish the written question responses. That's our office on November 19th. What that means is we're going to be issuing back our written answers to those questions that came in on the 5th by the 19th. So hopefully they get some quick turnaround, a couple of weeks, to get everybody clear on what the answers to the proposed questions were. And then the proposals are due in our office on Tuesday, November 26th. So at that point, we got a lot of work to do. Hopefully, we get, several wonderful applications, and we have some reviewing to do.
Thanksgiving fun.
Exactly right.
Yep.
So the week of December 9th is when we're anticipating interviewing these candidates, and with an award date anticipated in early January, around January 7th, per this schedule. Once you award a contract, that begins the negotiation phase for determining the contract. Once you award the bid, then you have to negotiate the contract. So we're anticipating the contract signing will take place on January 28th, so towards the end of the month. And then, and I'll underscore the no earlier than, but no earlier than March 1st, we're anticipating that the vendor will be ready to assume responsibilities. And like Mary said, the vendor will be coming in probably in a gradual sense. Once they're selected and contracted, I don't anticipate them coming in with, 15 people ready to go on day one. They're going to work their way through. They're going to have some of their managers potentially come in, talk to the managers there, work through it. Again, they'll be interviewing, like Mary said, all the existing employees. Hopefully that works out. And then there's less learning and less transition effort. So hopefully we anticipate it going very smoothly. Along those lines, the vendor selection committee, which has yet to be finalized, but I'm anticipating a member of the T&E committee to participate in that. I would ask that a member of the T&E committee be named and identified to participate in the vendor selection process, to help me with that selection process. There'll be a number of groups. There'll probably be a member of the Board of Selectmen and a few others in the group. But I'm asking if you guys could work amongst yourselves to figure out who might be a good candidate to help with that.
Sure.
And then along those same lines, we'll be selecting a water superintendent ahead of the ahead of the operation date, and that also, that selection process, it would be, I think, helpful for my selection team to have a member of this committee assigned to help us with that review as well. So that's what I have.
Tom, when do you think that you'll have kind of a preliminary indication of who's interested in bidding?
Good question. I would say the written questions will probably be a pretty good indicator, if not the site visits.
Right, because they have to be there at the site visit, right?
That's right.
So,
Yep.
and there's not hundreds of people that do this, is that right?
They're not, no. There's a handful of firms across the state that we would anticipate hearing from.
Okay.
Yep. And this isn't a secret, right? This hasn't
Right.
exactly been a quiet process.
No.
So, all these firms that do this, they know this is coming. They know that this is a potential work for them, so.
And communities around us contract out, right? Doesn't Cohasset?
Cohasset
and
does, yep.
Other towns contract out.
That's
so
right.
It's not a new thing to Massachusetts or our area.
Exactly.
Well, let's hope there's a lot of aggressive bidders.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with the turnaround time on the Q&A?
Yeah,
You are? Plenty of time?
yeah. Certainly hope so. We won't know the answer to that until the questions come in. I think it's going to be enough. And if it isn't, then we can stretch it, but, yeah.
I'd also say, Joe, that where Jeff and Environmental Partners have been so helpful is, as they're reading the RFP, they were saying to us, look, this is the kind of detail that people are going to need in order to do a meaningful quote. And, Jeff was pushing us to say, hey, you really got to define this. You got to define what these activities are. And so the attachments that we have here actually contain a lot of the information that is needed. And in fact, again, Environmental Partners put together a list of documents that they thought would help inform the RFP. And just today, we had another call with Aquarion, and we anticipate getting 8 to 10 more documents by the end of this week that will be made available through an addendum. So we've been very deliberative with this RFP so that we can try to answer, so that it answers as many questions as possible, and moreover, that this will facilitate the contracting process, so that there won't be a lot of back and forth on what's the scope of services. We were very deliberative in this process to say, let's be very specific now, so that we don't run into hiccups when it comes time to contract.
So all of the bidders see each other's questions and all the answers, so
Yes.
it's all public,
That's
shared.
right.
And there's,
Yep. And to that end, actually, just to clarify that, we won't be taking even verbal questions at the
Right,
site
that's what I
visit. We accept only written questions, and then we reproduce those written questions so that everybody has a level playing field when they're bidding.
Now, help me understand this. So we also contract out to a capital, help me define, is it a capital vendor? So pipe breaks in the middle of the night, who do we call? And how do we pick those people that we call? How does that process work?
You can take it.
So there will be, the vendor will manage all of that.
Okay.
But you're right, there'll be different groups, probably subcontractors, that will manage different components of the workflow. And in that case, certainly the
And
capital.
again, it depends on the things. So kind of the small repair where technicians can, go out and do something, but if a water main has to be replaced, then, that's a capital vendor.
And there will be a number of them. There'll be the pipes guy, there'll be the digging guy, there's a series of expertise that you need for the different work.
But they manage that, and the water superintendent would also have input into the
Yeah, the water
process.
superintendent's going to be managing, not managing, as I've talked to, talked to Jeff, monitoring in large part the process. Jeff is right when he points that out, that I had managing in there just as a term, but it's really monitoring. It's ensuring that the vendor is doing their job. So we need somebody in there that's knowledgeable, understands these things and these processes that need to take place on the distribution side, on the treatment plant side, on vendors, on the capital work. They need to have a sense of how all of this stuff is going to work together, and then monitor it and report it back out through me to the Board of Selectmen.
So would you say that the scope of work as requested in the RFP is essentially equivalent to what the scope of work by the existing 15 people of Aquarion is, or is it different?
Mark, I don't know if
Yes,
If-
very,
Very much the
very,
same?
they're effectively going to be doing what Aquarion
Okay.
is doing right now.
So for the purposes of at home, yes, the indication from the audience was they're going to be performing similar work.
Right.
And Jeff, if you wanted to chime in, if you don't mind coming to the podium, just so we can capture you for posterity purposes, I'd appreciate it. Just identify yourself for us.
Jeff Nutting from Franklin, Mass. The only distinguish that we changed in the RFP is the vendor is going to be the operation and maintenance vendor. All capital projects for new mains or replacement main will be managed by the water superintendent.
Okay.
So it's not a 100% match, it's 95%, 90% match. So we took that away because the vendor wouldn't know how much money the town was going to appropriate, how would they bid. So we separated those two categories. Operation maintenance, 24/7, 365, new water main on High Street, whatever it is. Town goes out to bid separately, has a design engineer, takes bids and manages that outside of the vendor.
And then
Well,
manages.
they have to coordinate, obviously, shut-offs and information, et cetera, but that's the only thing that's not 100%.
Right.
I would just add, because that was something that I know, and, Dick, I know you were involved in this. During the warrant article process, we started out and said, the water superintendent is going to manage capital, and then we said, hey, maybe that's not such a good idea, maybe we should have the operator. And what was interesting is that environmental partners, Jeff and Aquarion, all independently came back to us with feedback and said, gee, we actually think that the capital management should reside with the superintendent. And it was, I think what we understand is that there's going to be a lot of coordination where these groups are all going to be working together, but I think it was noteworthy to us that we had kind of three independent views challenge some of that thinking. So in the initial 5 years, that's the way we'll operate. Again, as the Transition and Evaluation Committee does its work, part of what we're going to ask you to do is to look at different facets of how this is structured to say what works well, what do we need to modify. For me in particular, the feedback that we got from Aquarion on that was, I found that particularly compelling.
And I would think the water superintendent would be in a better position to help coordinate efforts between Hingham and Hull and all the other projects going on. If there's street openings occurring, paving,
Yeah.
helping to coordinate all that.
I guess what I would also say is, as we talked about a lot, is that there's, the water superintendent and the operator are going to be working very closely on different things. And just because you are accountable or responsible for some work, it's not going to be done in a vacuum. There's going to have to be a lot of cooperation and in all different facets of this. So again, as we were putting this RFP together, we were mindful of the very thoughtful work that was done in the lead-up to town meeting. But as we were also talking to all these different folks who gave us feedback on the RFP, we wanted to keep an open mind on some of the things they said. I would add one more thing relative to the scope of the RFP. I think with respect to some of the things around, hydrants and meters and some other things, I would say that I think the standards in this RFP are a little bit higher than the status quo in terms of the responsibilities are the same, but meters, hydrants, just the volume. Also, some of the leak detection. I would also say that with a flushing program, we're basically saying the whole system has to be flushed within a year. I don't think that's been our experience with the water system for the past 7 years, so I would say that while the scope of the work is the same, the frequency or the intensity, in some ways, I think we've taken it up a notch.
So the water superintendent will report to you, Tom?
Yes.
Is that the reporting structure?
That's right.
So can you talk a little bit about kind of the timing associated with, I know it's kind of preliminary, what you're thinking about in terms of posting that job, when you would think a person in an ideal situation, if you were to find a candidate, when they would be starting?
Yep, so I was talking with Jeff a little bit about this a little earlier today. And this is preliminary, like you said. But we're hoping to get a preliminary new draft of the job description over to the Personnel Board here at their next meeting in October, hoping to finalize that, if not at that meeting, then at their November meeting. And then you got to figure, to find a qualified person of the caliber we're looking for, it's going to be probably a 3+ month process. So we will issue it in time to get that person on board in advance of the anticipated closing. I can't tell you exactly when we would post it, because I don't know when that closing is going to look at. We don't need someone for 6 months prior to the closing. Maybe a month or two prior to the closing might make sense. So as we move towards that closing date, we're going to have a better sense of when we need to post for that 3+ month window of acquisition, of hiring.
Okay.
And one of the benefits of environmental partners is that if that process takes longer, environmental partners has some expertise that will mean that we can move ahead with the transaction. If we don't have somebody in place, we have options.
Any questions for,
I just have a general question, and that is, I think it was about this time last year, a little bit later, when you had to come up with a budget for next year. And I still am confused as to what the town council said, that Hingham now owns the water system. At least that's what was said. Whereas I don't know where the money is going, and with a new budget, and whether you have overruns, underruns, exactly how all that settles out. Is that something that you can address at this
Yeah,
point?
so kind of really high level, and I would just say, right now, the town of Hingham does not own the water system. So,
Okay.
again, Aquarion, until the closing, and, think about it with a house purchase.
Well,
So,
that-
so until the closing, so Aquarion owns it, and they have a good husbandry requirement. The town is responsible, so the purchase price,
He's gonna
again, another thing that we did over the summer was we rolled the purchase price forward to the date of town meeting, because that's the date the purchase price takes effect. So we asked Aquarion for that, we validated the number. What happens during the good husbandry period is that any incremental capital gets effectively added to the purchase price because it wasn't in the purchase price, and that's an asset we're getting. So that's this capital process that we've set up where we're keeping track of things. In the original Article 10 appropriation, we not only had the purchase price, but we had $2.7 million for year one capital. So what we're doing is we're tracking the capital spending against that appropriation. The roll-forward purchase price number, again, we were conservative in the town meeting authorization, so we're very comfortable that we're within the authorization amount. What will happen at the closing is, in effect, we will give Aquarion not just the purchase price formula, but this process, and what we've been doing every month is reviewing those numbers so that we agree. The Beach Ave project is $1.3 million. Bremer Circle is this much. So right now, the financial costs that the town is incurring really relate to the transition activities that are taking place. And folks may recall that Article 13 in the warrant authorized spending for $250,000 for some of these activities. So that's what we're tracking towards. The P&L responsibility for the enterprise fund doesn't begin until the first day the town is operating the water system. So Dick, I don't know if that kind of
That makes
answers it.
That makes perfect sense. The point of confusion I had was that town council in one of the meetings made the statement that on the day of the vote,
Yeah.
we would become the owner.
Well,
So
it's
what you say
interesting,
makes sense.
from a legal perspective, that statement is right. That in a sense, what we learned is that the acquisition happened on April 23rd, and the town owned it. Now, the reason that was a significant thing is that's the date that the purchase price is calculated. And that's why they said that. So it's,
Yeah.
But in actuality, Aquarion is still receiving any of the bills, I mean, any of the payments is theirs
yes.
until,
Yes.
until we close.
And Aquarion has a legal good husbandry obligation to continue to maintain the system in accordance with the DEP, which has all been happening, and, yeah.
And the budget you've set as water commissioners anticipate, or includes a no increase, existing rates. You're moving,
Correct.
rolling forward the existing
Correct. I
rates.
mean, what the selectmen had said in the lead-up is in the first year, we would intend to keep the water rates flat. So your water bill, I mean, so the basis for the water bill will be the same. Our thought is that, as you said, Jim, at a certain point after the town's taken over, to do a cost of service study, because right now, you know, we don't have responses to this. So it's hard to calculate the service cost. So our thought is, let's keep things stable so there isn't, to
Right.
just, you know, make things easy.
Nor do you know debt expense or some of the other variables associated with it.
Right, but what I will say is that, again, as we put together that enterprise fund budget, I think, you know, we're very comfortable that the revenue, the 13 point, you know, now with the MRAM, $13.3 million in revenue, that the year one expenses will, you know, the revenue will more than cover that. You know, I think that as we look at this RFP, and again, given the intensity of some of the things we're talking about, we'll have to see how these bids come in.
Will there be an opportunity leading up to the closing, the P&S, to do any due diligence on Aquarion's records?
So,
No, the balance sheet and so forth, and systems, and what you're inheriting in terms of
so that's
assets and liabilities?
part of the asset purchase agreement, which is, we were originally calling it a purchase and sale agreement, is defining what exactly all those assets are, et cetera. And again, we're very lucky to have, especially litigation counsel Carrie Ryan, who is so familiar with the statute and understands what assets the town inherits. Again, Aquarion is in the process of putting together some exhibits for the asset purchase agreement that lay all that out so that there's a clear understanding.
And probably some sort of, you know, the ability for the town to go back if an asset isn't as was represented, if something happened to that asset.
Well, remember, too, that I would just say that the purchase price, remember that the purchase price is formula-driven, and it's an asset purchase agreement. So in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
it's not like when you buy a house and you say, well, gee, you know, the boiler isn't working, and so we got to adjust the purchase price. The statute defines the formula and says you get all the assets. There's no assertion made as to the condition of those assets. What we do have to do, to Joe's point, is, you know, for example, you know, we get all the vehicles. So we need to look at the vehicle, we need to look at the fixed asset registry and make sure that all the vehicles are there.
That's what I was getting at. I mean,
Right.
you know, the validity, I don't want to use the word validity, but the accuracy of the assets you're acquiring, you know, plant and equipment, you know, your receivables, your payables. So, you know,
Yeah.
that's what raised my question.
I would also say that, you know, our general counsel, John Coughlin, but with Bogle DeSantis and Coughlin, a lot of John's work is involved with things like this. So this is very much in his wheelhouse, and so that's also, that's very helpful. We've also enlisted the assistance of an accountant that has worked for the Attorney General on rate cases, just again to help with all that due diligence on the transaction.
Any other questions for Mary? Mary, maybe, or Tom, would you mind just talking about the role that Environmental Partners plays and how you chose to you know, selected them to work with us?
Yeah, sure. So we did a procurement that they responded to and won. And the main gist of the procurement was seeking a firm or potentially a person, if appropriate, that had experience with working with the DEP and all the business plan documents that you'll hear about when Mark comes up, all of the rules and regulations that have to be put into place, those types of guidance that we're going to need in order to operate this thing successfully. So that's their expertise. They come in with a lot of background that I'm sure Mark will speak to. They've done this in other communities. They've done transitions of water companies in other Massachusetts communities relatively recently. They have experience with all the issues that will come up from a technical standpoint, as well as, like Mary said earlier, the customer relations aspect of this stuff. So they're extraordinarily qualified. Since we've had them here, it's shown several times already that they're good. They're going to be a really good partner. No pun intended. They're going to be a great partner in this process because they just have a lot of depth of knowledge. And I like the idea that we ended up with a firm rather than an individual, because that depth is now a breadth of knowledge as well. Between Mark's experience, of course, he's a principal, and then we have Ryan Trahan, who has been assigned to us, also, I believe, a principal with the firm. So there's just a lot of skill sets that are coming at it from their group.
Great.
And I'm sure he'll be able to speak more to that, but.
Great. So before I let you folks go, any questions from the audience for these folks? Great. Well, thank you very much. Very helpful. Mark, if you don't mind coming on up.
Set up the tea.
That's right. Thanks for the softball.
Mark, I have a feeling we're going to get to know you pretty well here over the next 6 or 9 months. So maybe you can just introduce yourself, a little bit of your background and your firm's background.
Yes, we're going to get to know you very well. We already have, in just the last week and a half. Just by way of background, and to pick up on what Tom was talking about, Environmental Partners, we're a firm of about 50, 60 people, and we are a civil environmental engineering firm. We do a lot of infrastructure work, water supply, development, operations assistance on the water side, but we also do a lot of work in wastewater, stormwater, the gamut of the infrastructure needs that communities face. Probably the most applicable experience we have is we have worked with several communities now bringing new infrastructure to their town. Either wastewater systems, or probably the most direct experience we have is in the town of Eastham, where they had no water system before, and over the last few years, we've been helping them not only go through all of the planning that's associated with bringing a water system in place, but doing the design, the permitting, the construction management, and this was from the ground up, so therefore there were no policies in place. Groups like yours and boards of selectmen had to grapple with things like, well, what are the rules and regulations that are going to apply? So we have gone through many parallel processes on several different fronts that you folks are going to be going through as well. And we're very excited to be doing this in Hingham. You have already heard from Mary that the breadth of tasks associated with this effort are huge, and we have spent the last month really just getting our arms around what are all of the individual tasks and trying to put some meat on the bones in terms of what specifically needs to be done and what is the timing, so that everything can come together, so that when the actual purchase agreement is finalized, that everything is in place between your water system operator, your superintendent, and everything else that needs to come together with it, being rules and regulations and regulatory issues. On a personal side, I am a resident of Hingham. I live in Crow Point. I've been here for over 25 years at this point, and once upon a time, I was a sewer commissioner here in town. I've worked with Dr. Schultz on some of the wastewater facilities planning committee, and nobody could have lived in this town and not been aware, involved, debated this whole issue of should we buy this water system or not. I bring that background as well to it. The people at Environmental Partners that are going to be involved, you're going to see me directly involved in this, along with Ryan Trahan. He had another meeting tonight, but at your next meeting, Ryan will be here. Because of the breadth of work that we have, this is going to take more than one cowboy to steer this horse. And Ryan has been very heavily involved in the development of the RFP, supporting the town on that. And I've been focusing on the business plan developments, but we both work together. We sit side by side. We attend the meetings together with this working group, and that's the way it's going to continue. You're going to continue to see both Ryan and I directly involved with you folks on this. So if there are no other questions, what I'm going to focus on are two of the tasks that this committee is going to be involved in directly, beginning right away, and that's both on the business plan, number one, and on the rules and regulations. On the rules and regulations, so I guess the best place for me to start is to just talk to what are the specific tasks in the schedule that will be involved. If you could pass this down, and actually, if you could pass this out to the folks out there. I think you have them, but Kirk and the others will need it. And actually... Thank you. So let's just start looking at the bar chart that I issued out. And with regards, I'm going to go bottom first on the system regulations, because we are going to need to work together in developing what these regulations are. We're going to prepare a draft for you of the regulations, so you have something to begin with. We're not going to, start with just a blank slate. Similar to the RFP, we're going to be drawing from your existing regulations that Aquarion has, other surrounding communities, what their regulations are, get them to you so that we can have an initial conversation about that. And we will be giving that to you probably prior to your next meeting with the T&E committee, with you guys, and that's probably going to happen, within the next couple of weeks. A date, Jim, for you to schedule.
Yeah, we have a tentative meeting already scheduled for October 7th. If we need to push that back, we certainly can.
Well, we're going with that.
Okay.
So part of that conversation, the devil is in the detail when it comes to rules and regulations, and what kind of policies, procedures are specific to our town that we want to have implemented in these. We're going to get into conversations like who provides meters, how is it paid for, really small issues, but that need to be incorporated in the rules and regs. This is going to be, as Mary was saying, a real open process, a lot of dialogue between the committee here and some back and forths as we tune this up. And then ultimately, it's going to come to a point where we say we're ready to go with this. It will go to the Board of Selectmen / Water Commissioners, who ultimately will need to have a public hearing on those. And given the time of year that we're in, and the time that we expect we're going to need to take, we're anticipating that public hearing would be in the early to mid-January timeline, which is fine in terms of the remaining aspects of the project. Going to the business plan, the second sheet I provide you goes through what the business plan consists of, but broadly, we are looking to start putting this business plan together. It is going to be a document that's thicker than the RFP by the time we're done, and has many, many elements to it that I'll explain in a couple of minutes. But this, too, is a effort that we're going to be looking to have a lot of dialogue with all of you on, and ultimately are looking to get this submitted to DEP in the early January timeframe. So you can see how the timing is set up between rules and regs and this DEP business plan, with other aspects of your effort going on, selecting your system operator and superintendent, that there's going to be some good synergy between all of those. going to the content of the business plan, so going to this sheet here, and I just wanted to give you a sense of the kind of information that's involved in the business plan, and where our efforts are going to be on that. The real function of the business plan for DEP is for them to be provided with sufficient enough information so that they have confidence that this new entity, the town taking over the water system, knows what they're doing, quite bluntly. And so there is, so it covers the gamut of everything from, what is the administration, the governance of the system, what does the system itself consist of, and what are the O&M programs you have in place, and all the supporting information that will confirm for DEP that the system can be operated in compliance with the regulations. So there are parts of the business plan, many parts of it that we can prepare with the information we have now, but there are also parts of it that's going to need to be added as work is completed, such as the rules and regulations, the rates, and some of the financial aspects of it. In the first section on the administration, pretty straightforward. Who's responsible is the operators, being is the governance being the water commissioners. We do need to list in here who the operators are going to be. So this is a part of the business plan that needs to be completed after the operator is selected, because we need to provide names, license numbers, all of their ratings, that kind of detail. And there's also just kind of a broad question on, do you have standard operating procedures in place for running the systems? Is there a capital improvements plan? Outside services such as laboratories and whatnot that supports the operation of the system, do you have those contracts in place, and those types of things? The second section deals with planning, data, and demand. So it looks at generally what are the demands of the system, who is served between the three communities here, do you have interconnections with other water systems? We're still kind of at a high level here in terms of describing what the system consists of. This is still, we're at the shape of the elephant stage of describing it. The third section is the financial section, and it's going to talk about all these items that we have here of, how is it organized, enterprise fund, the sources of revenue that come in through your system rates and fees, and what are they. So here's an element of the business plan that will get firmed up after we're done with our efforts on the rules and regulations. They ask for detail on what the income and revenue is estimated for the system, all of which we'll be able to draw from information that Aquarion is providing us now. We do not need to invent the wheel on this. Same with the operating needs, and then also looking at what projects specifically are on the slate over the next 10 years, and then what does that translate into in terms of capital debt, both outstanding and what you're going to be taking on. This whole aspect of the financial part of the system is probably going to draw on largely the capital planning that's already in motion right now with Aquarion, because there is going to be a whole nother effort where we're going to be taking a hard look at truly what your system needs are, which will be a more in-depth and extended analysis of that will probably happen beginning next spring or something on that order. But that is okay as far as DEP is concerned. I think what they are looking for is to make sure that, there's that type of thinking that is available now with the system. And as with any system, capital improvement plans and whatnot are always getting modified as they get forward, as we go forward. Section 4 gets into a lot of the detail about the system. Who is the population that's being served? What are the supplies, storage, distribution system characteristics? So we need to provide real specific information on all the sources. What is the capacity of the source, down to what are the pumps that are being used, a description of emergency power provisions, and the same on down the line. For your treatment systems, real detail on what the treatment plant consists of, the chemicals that are being used, how they're stored, is there containment for them, all of that. All of this is existing information, and this is an area of the business plan that we're already beginning to prepare now, because we have that information now. But it's extensive. On the distribution system, we need to describe, well, what kind of pipe is in the ground, what's its age, what's its makeup, what kind of pressures do you have in the system, what are fire flows like, things of that nature. And then in the final section on operations and maintenance, we're going to be going through the same kind of description of what the O&M program is. What is your O&M manual do you have? Are you maintaining an inventory of spare parts? Instrumentation control, what kind of SCADA system, as it's called, is used for remote monitoring of the system, from all aspects of the system, from water supply pumping right on through to treatment, storage, and distribution. There are some key programs that DEP focuses on, cross-connection control program to make sure you're not getting any backflow into the system that could contaminate drinking water. The water quality monitoring program, all of these are already in place with you, and certainly in the near term are not going to change, but just need to be reiterated and provided for DEP. Emergency response planning, again, this is a document that we just received today from Aquarion, which we feel is going to be directly applicable to this. And then there's an aspect that talks about water quantity and conservation. What are the conservation measures that are taken today between, metering, unaccounted for water leak detection, things of that nature, and then just the conservation measures as well. The plan is supported by a series of appendices, as you would imagine, that includes all these elements, such as the coliform sampling plan, the emergency response plan, cross-connection control, and all of that. So there's a lot to put together here that we'll be working on over the next few months. I think probably the immediate focus is going to be getting the baseline information that we have available already in hand into this business plan, and that we're going to be working together on those aspects where we need some input and that have, policy issues related to them, and that's how the rules and regulations also kind of blend into what we're doing here.
Mark, does any of this, like when you're describing the distribution system, does an engineering study need to happen, or are we using prior information?
We'll be using prior engineering. I should also ask that we have done engineering for Aquarion in the past, helped develop the hydraulic model for the distribution system, have done work on the treatment plant. This is up through 2014, 2015, so we have a lot of familiarity with it as well. But no, none of this effort is going to require us to do new work. That's specifically what we're trying to avoid right now. As we move through the process, we're going to be identifying areas that we're going to be recommending to you that this would be a good thing for you to, look at or whatever, down the road.
So I see from the timeline that you're looking to submit the business plan at some point in early February. Let's assume the closing happens in March, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Is that an appropriate, how long does the DEP need to actually review this?
They will probably need 3 weeks, maybe a month to review. And, this schedule reflects what I call Part A and Part E in this B, and that is not, there's not a Part A and Part B in the business plan. We were thinking more in terms of what realistically is going to be the best way to approach this with DEP, given that on the financial side, there's going to be a lot of thought given to, what is your near-term capital improvements plan and whatnot. And so our thinking, evolves as we kick this around as a group here. And now, we're not thinking that we need to be making separate submittals of Part A, Part B to DEP, that we can do it all as one, but be communicating with DEP as we're preparing it so they understand what we're going to be providing them. So, given that, it doesn't necessarily mean that our timelines are going to be faster, because the completion of the business plan is going to be tied to things like completing the rules and regulations and things of that nature. But it does mean that we'll be able to assemble those pieces of the plan a lot sooner.
And the DEP, at the end of this whole thing, let's say they approve the plan, they provide exactly what? Like a certificate, I'm thinking of a certificate of occupancy, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The blessing to the transition.
Yeah, there is an approval letter that they will provide, and where the rubber meets the road is that they need to transfer the DEP permits from Aquarion to the town. And that's what we're really managing around, because we want that transfer to become effective at the time that you have an operator, in place.
Great, awesome. I think Tom wants to chime in on this as well, as he makes his way to the microphone.
I'm not used to navigating the room. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that if you'll remember during the acquisition phase, we had some help from a gentleman named Bob Gollage from Gollage Strategies. He had been helping us with a lot of the state regulatory requirements along the way and understanding what those were going to be. Bob is still on our team. He's still available to us, and he'll be helping us and Mark and his team navigate through the DEP process. So just want to make sure everyone understood that.
And where have you seen, where have the roadblocks been on this before? Is it every aspect, or do they provide more emphasis on one part over another?
Well, frankly, there haven't been many DEP business plans that have had to hit DEP.
Okay, right.
In the
okay.
southeast region, there's been one, and
Which is
it's
East
for
Ham?
the East Ham water system.
Right.
That process went very, very smoothly, because our approach is always to involve DEP early and often at the level of people who are reviewing this. We've been in touch with them already. There are two individuals in particular who are going to be kind of managing the review of this thing, so they understand what's coming into them, before they see it. I am not anticipating that DEP is going to be, throwing any trees in our path on this one. Because all the elements of the DEP business plan are, this is an operating water system, and it's really translating it to what the town is doing here. So I think we're going to find they'll be very, very cooperative with us.
How much input do you need from the third-party operator we hire?
None at this point, none. None. In fact, we plan to have this, you can see that we plan to have this submitted even before the third-party operators online, with the exception of the fact that we do need to report, well, who specifically are the operators and their licenses and things of that nature.
Okay.
Just the process of preparing the RFP began to pull together a lot of the information that we need for the DEP business plan. So,
Right, so for the business plan, you envision, can you tell us how you envision the role of our committee?
we're going to start pulling together various elements of the various sections of the business plan, and we're going to be bringing it to you for review and input, frankly. You all have been heavily involved in this issue and have a lot of insights into, various aspects of the system and the town's ownership of it. That's going to be probably very important to get input on. And I think the aspect of when we are pulling together all of the financial aspects of it, that's an area that this committee will also be able to play an important role on.
On that issue, a lot of the financials have been in hand. Had Aquarion reported into the town year over year with financial results? No. So any financial information you're referring to now has been obtained via, how have you got your hands on that?
Well, they do a DPU filing every year. There's an annual report there that provides a lot of detail. We have the
That
last...
answers some of the questions you've pointed out here.
Yes, yeah, and we're just beginning to get into it, so my expectation is that we will be able to glean that information from that.
From just a compliance perspective, is that part of the ongoing, there'll be a vision and looking forward from day one operating on from regulatory compliance, how the town will react to that and stay on top of that? Is that, do you envision that being the third-party operator, or who would, in your opinion, like, who would own the compliance perspective of ongoing?
The sister operator will very definitely be responsible for regulatory compliance and reporting. And that's all articulated in the scope of work
Yep.
within the RFP, with oversight by the superintendent, and also, us
Right.
providing the guidance, so. We have worked with communities in procurement for privatized services, but also in supporting towns and water departments on their regulatory compliance work as well. I think Mary or Tom also did mention this aspect of, another element of this committee is the whole aspect of public information and outreach. And with all these projects where you're introducing a whole new infrastructure to a community, it's the public outreach component of it that is really, really critical. And, we feel that, saturating people with information is, listen to questions, provide their answers as many times as it takes to get it out there, makes for a smoother process in the long run. In the case of Eastham, for example, when they began debating just the concept of having a water system, and the public outreach would have audiences of a couple hundred people, we'd be giving monthly updates to the Board of Selectmen. After 2 years, we weren't getting anybody there because they were all out there. And that's, the goal is for this town and this committee is to have, to induce the same level of confidence in the public as that. So that's a whole topic, I know, Jim, that you're going to be undertaking.
Yeah, that's
here.
really important, actually. I think that's a critical function of this committee, is to help serve as a conduit for that information and to give folks, ratepayers, comfort in where they can go if they've got concerns or questions
Yep. Yep.
or any of those issues. So we'll spend some time at a future meeting kind of strategizing around that as a committee and determining kind of how best to get out there, basically, how best to let folks know what we're doing.
Right.
We did post tonight's meeting in Hull and Cohasset, and as I mentioned, we'll create an internal website, but then it's the expectation that we ultimately will need to name the system and involve the community in that decision, create their own the website for that, and move forward that way. So we have a lot of work to do in that area, and we'll need some help in order to help us get through it.
Yeah.
On that point, so we'll help you with the DEP business plan, but let's talk about rules and regs. It sounds like that's more of a near-term task
Yep.
for us. In your experience, it seems like we've got the rules and regs already in place from Aquarion, and I can't say Aquarion, I'm going to say Aquarion. And, those have been in place for, multiple years. I'm not sure how they change or how much they've changed over the time. In your experience, how much public feedback have you received? Now, Eastham is a different animal because that was starting from scratch. Do you see, and how much effort should we be making? I know there's a public hearing on it, but how much effort should we make to try to get public feedback on the rules and regs before it even reaches the water superintendent?
It's interesting with rules and regs that we rarely get a lot of public interest in them. They're pretty dry, mechanical
Yeah.
documents, as you would expect, and they're fundamentally going to be what they are today. We can talk about it as a group, but I think that, making them available for people to see in advance of the public hearing, always good.
Yep.
We could do a public information session that just walks through what the basic, fundamental aspects are of the rules and regs. Very rarely do we get these public debates going on certain aspects of the regs. I think that as we develop them together, and even in our next meeting on the 7th, we may begin to get a sense of, where the areas are that are going to be of greater interest to the public and potentially ones that we want to be sure that we're getting feedback on.
Okay.
We have hearings on rules and regs where we get, nobody showing up for them.
Right.
Even, when we did them in East Hampton, we didn't get anybody showing up for that. But there had been a lot of other public outreach things happening at the same time, which is I expect that you're going to be doing as a committee as well. Hopefully, before the end of the year, certainly, there's going to be an information portal, webpage, just information outreach, so people are going to be aware of what's going on.
Great. Any questions for Mark?
Just once a license is obtained and transferred to the town of Hingham, is there a process for having to renew it, say every 5 years, every 10, or is it a permanent license?
All of your water sources here are what are called registered. Therefore, they were, in the vernacular of DEP, they're grandfathered. So that's never renewed. Approvals for things like treatment plants and things of that nature, those are one-and-done deals. There is a Water Management Act permit that is renewable every 20 years, incremental in 5 years, and been the topic of a lot of debate because all Water Management Act permits are in the process of being renewed by DEP right now. So we need to get into, what the status of all that is here in town, but that would be the only one.
Great. So you'll be preparing a draft of the rules and regs for us.
Right.
Potentially before the 7th, but no later than the 7th, you'll have it
Yep.
prepared, and we'll begin the review.
Yep.
So for the committee's purposes, that will be the main objective for that night, is a review of the rules and regs. And, to the extent that you can get it to us early, that would be great.
Right, no, we'll look to do that for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we'll determine any other issues that need to be covered that night. Did you know we have a posting requirement? I'll post the meeting and the agenda next week. So that's all locked and loaded. Any other questions? Any questions from the, Kurt?
Kirk Schultz, 65 Prospect Street, and not only am I former board member with Mark on the master wastewater comprehensive plan, but also I'm a member of the Hingham Board of Health, Hingham Sewer Commission, and the Water Supply Committee. So I have a number of things that I'll come up later to talk about some of the things with the Water Supply Committee specifically, because they had talked about those things. But as far as the rules and regs, having written a number of those, having those myself with the Sewer Commission, I think one of the most significant pieces is you're going from a corporate tariff, the rules and regs that are operated by a organization, a company, and you're going to be adding a public input component to it, variance procedure, public hearing process that we currently don't have. And that is going to be fabulous, because one of the problems that we've had over the years is we never had input into that process. So this rewriting of the rules and regs, again, taking the model that we have from Aquarion as far as the best practices, pipe size, things like that, but allowing the community and the residents and the customers to be able to come in and say, well, geez, is this something we could do potentially different? And we do that all the time with the Board of Health and the Sewer Commission and work that out. So that in itself is a tremendous improvement over to what we have now. And I'll come back up and talk about some of the other issues. But I think the rules and regs, that starts the framework. Just one other example. Within the Aquarion rules and regs, their tariff, they have a water balance plan. New contractor comes in, wants to build a development, they have to put water into a conservation program. It's a financial water bank. The outline of the program is in the regs, but the way it is operated and the way it functions is under Aquarion policy. And that's been a point of contention for years, that the Water Supply Committee has tried to gain input into steering that in a direction which is more open and transparent. So in that regard, there's going to be a lot more extensive sunshine in the regs, talking about these things for many years. We really had no ability to really implement a change or see something improved as far as the public ability to be involved with that. So I'll come back up later to talk about some water supply stuff, but on the regs, I think that's really important. I'm thrilled that you're starting off
Great.
with that.
Great,
Thank you.
good input, thank you. Appreciate it. Any other questions out there? Any questions from the committee for Mark?
I guess only have the two of you spoken about that aspect. We haven't gotten far enough in terms of borrowing from the existing public input section that already exists, I guess. If not, makes sense to do it, I would think.
Yeah, I think Kurt brings up really, nail on the head in terms of the aspects of the rules and regs that are going to be key issues for this committee to talk about. The variance procedure is a really, that's a policy issue, and we'll fall to how we need to do that, and should be benchmarked off of what we have. I mean, the sewer regs are obviously a good place to look at that, as well as, we're familiar with what that process is in other communities, and the whole water balance issue is unique to Hingham, and is one that's, I like the way that you put it, Kirk, that, we need to put some sunlight into that as to how that's managed, and whether that's something that gets embodied within the regulations or not, it's still, a program that we need to talk through, and, how is it administered, what's the formula, and, I guess more importantly, how can it be expended? So, yeah, I think great points from Dr. Schultz.
Yeah, and then ultimately, we'll make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen / Water
Right.
Commissioners, and they ultimately are the ones that have set and approved the policy around that. So, that's great. Thanks, Kirk.
What's that?
Thanks so much. See you on the 7th?
7th, right.
Okay, so we just have a couple more items. So, so next on our agenda is, you've heard a couple things. You've heard that we'll be involved in a couple of the efforts relative to the selection process of the third-party operator, as well as a selection of the water superintendent. So just for my purposes, I think ultimately, as chair, I'll be the person still kind of assigning those tasks, and there's plenty to go around, so if you're not selected for these first two things, there's going to be a bunch of others, but just, if you wouldn't mind just showing your hand if you're interested in the selection process for the third-party operator, just so I have a sense who would be interested in serving on that committee. Great, okay, great, thank you. And then, how about for the water superintendent selection process? Great, wow, evenly matched, perfect. And I'll circle back, I'll get a better sense from Tom, kind of the skills he's looking for, and the background he's looking for, and then try to make the most applicable.
One personal consideration is, I've got a trip planned,
Okay,
and so there may be some overlap or conflict
great.
in terms of the timing of the RFP, so I can...
Yeah, we'll talk offline
Yeah.
on your constraints, and if anyone has constraints relative to those kind of things, just let me know, but thanks. Thanks, Dick, I'll come back to you on that. Great, so October 7th, our plan is to meet, discuss the rules and regs at the first stop, and I'll also think about how we can start communicating these meetings a little more effectively, because there will be groups of folks that may want to have further input into that, and, I would love to have that teed up, so by the time the public hearing happens, all the concerns and the issues have already been raised and addressed from our work. So we'll put some thought into how we best communicate that. So from a housekeeping issue, not only do we have a next meeting, but also just as an aside, we are an open board. We'll always meet as a group in an open meeting. I intend to have as many of these taped as possible for public consumption at some point. We'll be meeting on October 7th in this room. I'm taking the minutes for tonight, and then we're hope to have some administrative support from the town, since we're going to be meeting so often in terms of helping with the minutes, but if that doesn't come to fruition and the budget isn't approved, we may take turns on our committee in terms of taking minutes. So what I would normally suggest is we just kind of rotate through. So by next meeting, I'll have a draft of the minutes that I'll circulate ahead of time for your review, and then we'll talk about it at our meeting and approve them, if in fact you're comfortable with them. I think that's all I have on housekeeping. Any general questions from anybody on how things are going to work going forward? What I'd like to do also is, once I have a better sense as to how long some of these things are going to take, like how many meetings, rules and regs are going to take, I'm going to try to schedule out as many of these meetings going forward as possible. Not too far, but far enough so we all have control over the schedule, because I know life gets sometimes in the way, and, we'll be relying on, the paying job gets in the way. And we rely on Mark and Ryan's availability as well, so we'll want to coordinate all that, and that's one of my jobs, is coordination. So we'll try to put the next meeting in the books. I'll have a tentative meeting in mind, and we can discuss on October 7th, where we meet, or I may take a poll ahead of time to see if you're available. So I'll try to continue to do that moving forward, so we all kind of know when the meeting is scheduled. If there's no other questions from the committee, I want to open it up to comments from the public. Kirk, this is your opportunity to talk about the water supply.
Kirk Schultz, 65 Prospect Street. It's taken us a long time to get to where we are tonight. I remember when I started with the Water Supply Committee back in 2002, it was about this very issue that, we argued that we have a company that really doesn't represent strongly enough, we thought, the citizens and the perspective of the town into how to manage and operate, how to manage and oversee the water system. And so, being a former president of the Wheel River Watershed Association, that was also very important to me from an environmental standpoint. And it really got me into politics. And so now I have a number of roles in that. But what I see this committee doing, which is so vital, is to establish, we heard tonight, the business plan, an organizational concept, a compliance program in which there's public input into the process. And I know we're going to see that, and the level of detail we heard tonight, I'm very comfortable, if not ecstatic, about what I'm hearing. But just to kind of give you a couple of concepts that are out there is, the Water Supply Committee, been around for a long, long time, and a lot of the roles of the Water Supply Committee have gone away. We were the interface between Aquarion and the town, and especially during the acquisition process, for they to be able to have a public forum to talk about what they're doing, for us to learn. So that's gone away. And so now what we have is, what are the things that the Water Supply Committee, what have we primarily focused on that we see coming up? And I don't want to overwhelm the committee, and it really will go into a lot with the consultants in the environmental groups. But the registration for our town, some years we've been over our allowed registration amount, and recently we've been 99 and 97% of our registration. So that's something that's going to come up fairly soon. And I think with the transition, the DEP is probably going to give us a little bit of a breather on that. But they had a requirement that Aquarion had to submit what their plan is for additional water source for a permit. I see that coming up, and I hope that the acquisition team, along with the selectmen who are our water supervisors, that they consider possibly maintaining the Water Supply Committee in some aspect, because we have a lot of experience on that, and it really is something that's quite important. And it's that community involvement. It's the environmental groups, it's the everyday homeowner in Hingham, that this matters to them, the environment, how that relates to our water supply. It's not a business thing. And so to have that public component and not overwhelm the selectmen with their time, and to have that working group within there, I think that's really important. I've already talked about the water balance plan. That's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time, that we just haven't had any involvement in that and oversight, and now we're going to have that written in the policy. And whatever I can do to help out, I have a lot of experience in this. Again, because I've been here since 2002 with the Water Supply Committee, and, whatever I can do, and the Water Supply Committee, whatever they can do to help out. With the Board of Health, we have private water supply regulations that I oversee, and we're actually going to promulgate some new water supply regulations relative to well water. So to have that coordination between the two groups as far as that's concerned. And I mentioned the fact about a permit. One of the things that we worked with to try to grease that wheel to get additional water from the system and not overwhelm the environment or make it expensive was to work with developing bylaws for the town. We talked about an irrigation system bylaw. That is a town entity that would assist the water supply system in getting a permit and additional water withdrawal. So that cooperative effect between various groups in that regard. And the last thing, as you heard, we're working on a comprehensive master wastewater plan, and really that is in a stage where it can't be completed until we have the water supply component. And if you had sat in, I know that Selectman Powers was in with the South Hingham study, that we did an awful lot of work on both the wastewater side and the water supply. So there's a lot of information that's there. So that's why I was thrilled to hear we're not going to reinvent the wheel with new studies. Everything really is out there. It's just putting it together for the first time. And that's what this group is going to be able to do by overseeing and managing that. So I just wanted to, again, speak for the Water Supply Committee that we're there. The group is still chartered, and their assistance is there, along with the Board of Health and the Sewer Commission. So thank you very much.
Great.
Appreciate the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it, Kirk. Awesome. Any other comments? Okay, I'll be back to you with just a confirmation on October 7th, our meeting, this room, 7 p.m., and I'll forward any additional information ahead of time if we need it. And I think if no one else has any issues, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye. Great, thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate it.